Hello everybody and welcome to the Zeiss Batis Distagon at 25mm f2 T-Star round glass review. This lens was made by Zeiss. It's a Batis lens. Batis is a family of lenses with a similar exterior design, ranging from 18 to 85mm. There's also a 40mm in there. The three wider ones are all Distagon designs, and the 85mm is a Sonar. This is the Distagon 25mm f2 T-Star. It was introduced in 2015 and as of this video's recording in early 2024 is still available new. Typical lens uses will include astrophotography, architecture, landscape, and cityscapes, and I'm going to argue this is also a fantastic option for street photography and as a general use wide-angle lens. If you've watched enough of the videos on this channel in this series, you're likely to know that 24mm is my favorite focal length for general use wide-angle lenses, and this is pretty darn close to that. For your bottom line up front, this is probably the most technically perfect lens I've used in this focal length class. Noting that it's, yes, an expensive lens, it's absolutely worth it if it's within your budget and fits a need in your camera case. If you are here to find out whether or not you would like to buy this lens, it would be hard for me to envision a scenario where buying this lens was regrettable. The focal length and angle of view are 25mm and 82 degrees on full frame, which is approximately 38mm and 60 degrees on APS-C. The aperture range is 2 through 22. Element and group count are 10 and 8. The design type is Distagon, which we usually just call retrofocus on this channel. The filter size is 67mm. Closest focus is 0.2 meters, which in the US, well, ladies, you've all had a guy tell you what 0.2 meters is. The autofocus drive type is autofocus with a very quiet silent motor. I don't remember what kind of motor, but quiet. Or you can use manual focus if you set that on your camera. Native mount is Sony E. The dimensions are 81 by 78 by 92mm. I believe that is without the lens hood. And the weight is 335 grams. My first tip is that if you do not enjoy the way that Zeiss lenses render, and I know that not everyone does, well, then you're not going to like this lens. This lens's images feel very Zeiss, and if you asked me to pick images I had taken with that Zeiss look, I think most of them would come from this lens. Next up, this video series generally avoids discussing purple fringing simply because shooting raw and adjusting with a slider will eliminate it. But as a quick note, in select situations with high contrast areas when the image is baseline overexposed, there will be some purple fringing. To mitigate it, just ensure proper exposure with high contrast scenes. As a wide lens, the 24mm class, which, let's face it, this lens is closer to 24mm than 28, is a personal favorite. The Batis 25mm f2 pairs an ideal carry-around focal length with a very fast aperture for that focal length. Now that said, this is a relatively large lens for that class and speed compared to all the other 24mm f2 lenses ever made. In terms of being a good all-around lens, this lens can do it, but the closer the subject is to the lens, the greater it will be distorted. This lens is quite good for street photography, alongside landscapes, cityscapes, architecture, and, I assume, astrophotography. An asterisk on that last point, I haven't personally shot astrophotography with my Sony cameras because of the Star Eater byproduct of their imaging algorithm. Lastly, this lens is far more interesting to use in portrait orientation than in landscape. This is especially true for landscape photos. I mean landscape subjects, not landscape orientation. The angle of view on the Batis 25mm allows for exceptional scene coverage, and by stopping the lens down a good amount, the depth of field will more than meet most needs. This section looks at some test photos to identify what this lens's out-of-focus areas can tell us about its performance. So the hanging lights photos that we're seeing right now show that the aspherical element's onion rings can be seen when lights in the image have a solid background. In practical use, I really didn't notice onion rings in the images I was taking, but in a test setting, onion rings manifested and were far worse with close focus than infinity. Let's get to the interesting part of this section, the dots analysis. This lens performed identically at each corner, which is incredible, and I'm not sure I've actually seen perfect performance around all four corners from a lens before. The center squares from this lens's test are pretty darn close to perfect, with like a half a pixel of chromatic aberration that could honestly just be due to my computer monitor screen. I'm going to call the center performance on this lens absolutely perfect. We'll go into the top right corner here and show it at a 100% crop, which exhibits some inconsequential chroma smearing of about 4 pixels, with about 1 pixel of chromatic aberration. This is on a 33 megapixel sensor. That's functionally nothing. At a 400% crop, you might be able to see that performance variation from perfection slightly better. Let me just take a moment to remind you that the tests in this section are performed wide open. This lens only gets better as it stops down. This is our first Distagon lens, but is that really anything special? Well, no. Distagons are a type of retrofocus lens. What's interesting to me about this lens is how much there is in the way of specialized glass, as shown in the diagram. I do have some interesting facts about the Distagons above and beyond the diagram for you. So the Distagon is a retrofocus lens. The original retrofocus lens was named so by Pierre Ingenue to indicate that it was a reverse telephoto design. The equivalent Zeiss lenses of the time, those designed in Jena, were called flectagons. And if you've seen my Zeiss 50mm f4 flectagon review from the end of 2023, well, that's a flectagon. When optical design moved to Oberkochen, I know I'm probably getting that wrong, for Zeiss, the flectagon name was dropped and the Distagon name took over. The name is taken from the word distance and the Greek word for angle, and no, I won't be trying to pronounce that, because if you think my German pronunciation is bad, well, my Greek pronunciation would like you to hold its beer. So, in short, Distagon is the Zeiss brand name for retrofocus. Breathing is visible when skipping between two images. When transitioning in video from the closest focus to 0.7 meters further out, breathing is basically imperceptible. So for videographers, breathing can be easily controlled with slower transitions and shorter transition distances. The aperture is stepped and controlled on the camera. The front element is stationary, non-rotating, and does not move in and out because this lens has internal focus. The autofocus effect on audio is non-existent, as this lens's autofocus motor is silent, even with on-camera audio. Sharpness is, as the dots test chart in the Seidel analysis section showed, fantastic from corner to corner. There's no faulting this lens's performance as it relates to sharpness at all. It's one of the sharpest lenses I've ever used. Build quality is very good, though I'm not a huge fan of the rubber focus ring at all. I remember the cameras of the 90s, and when they arrived, people loved the rubber grips. Now, those same cameras' grips are often tacky or cracking. A quality lens like this should be expected to last decades. Period. I do not think that the rubber grip on this lens will do that, and in time, there will likely be fleets of these with ugly and worn or sticky grips. I would have much preferred a milled metal grip, or just none at all. Contrast is stunning, and there's little work needed in post to make raw photos pop in terms of contrast. Yes, I know, I often say I prefer a flatter lens, and I do, but you can also dial a lot of the contrast back with this lens if you so choose, and not lose a great amount of detail. Aperture stars manifest right away at f2.8. By f4 they're noticeable, and at f5.6 clearly defined with strong and crisp points. They keep improving through each aperture setting, though the quality improvement at apertures smaller than f11 is less dramatic than from f2.8 to f5.6. I personally like this lens's aperture stars the best when shot at f11, as that balances star size with point clarity. Out of focus areas are very nice. I often dislike retrofocus lens design blurry areas, but with this lens the transition from sharpness to blurry is simply perfect, and the blur that this lens provides is quite pleasing for most images most of the time. This is especially true at closer focuses and wider apertures, but translates well to smaller apertures too, and if you really want to get to know a little bit more about why that is, a simple Google search on lens microcontrast would do a lot to help explain why those transitions are so, well, perfect. Distortion is present and in the pincushion direction. I did go back and rehang my graph paper here for this shot specifically to make sure that it was flat, and I'm comfortable that it was. This distortion performance is not great if your images have straight lines at the corners, and this also means that having images which aren't level will make keystoning a bit more apparent. Light loss is, as Zeiss will indicate, a feature and not a flaw. I do tend to agree with that, and while light loss is quite dramatic when photographing a white screen at infinity focus, in practical application and real-world use, I find the light loss to add a softening of the image's character that is quite pleasing in most uses. Flare never manifested for me with this lens. Ghosting only appeared in one photo, and to achieve that, the sun had to be in the frame and the image a bit overexposed. It's not a pleasant ghost, but this isn't a lens that really is going to be used for images where ghosting would be desired. Balance with cameras was fine with a heavy camera like the A7 IV. I would not recommend this for light cameras like the entry tier of alpha APS-C bodies. In addition to the weight, it would be a bit odd with how much larger this lens is than those cameras. Also, on APS-C, a lot of the image character from this lens is lost. If you're looking for a wide-angle APS-C lens, check out the Sony 20mm f2.8 instead, and I, do have a round glass review video on that lens. The photos in this video ought to tell a story. This lens has technical chops that are hard, if not impossible, to match. Yes, but this isn't just a technical show-off lens. This lens handles subjects well and in a flattering manner. It combines all of its technical precision with a fair amount of stunning and even across the frame vignetting. Add to that the clarity and strength of this lens's aperture stars, and what this lens delivers is a strong performance for any subject or image type that a 25mm lens would be used for. Lenses like this don't need accolades. They're well known, they're sought out. So let's leave this review where it is now and simply take some time to appreciate some more photos from the Zeiss Batis Distagon 25mm f2 T-Star.